Jesus had 12 disciples, but after Pentecost, the Bible only mentions a handful of them. So what happened to the rest? It's easy to think that the rest just sat on their butts in Jerusalem, and they seem to just vanish from history, or at least from our history. But while we remember only those apostles who headed west, like Peter, in reality, the apostles headed all over, including outside the Roman Empire. And some of the apostles we can barely seem to remember are heroes of the faith elsewhere. Thaddeus, for example, was recognized as the patron saint of the Church of the East, much like Peter is for the West, having evangelized modern-day Syria and parts of Iraq. But the apostle who went the furthest, and one whose fruit can still be seen today, is the apostle Thomas. Now, we best know Thomas as the doubting disciple, but when Europeans began arriving on the western shore of India, they found Christians already practicing. And even to this day, there are Christian leaders and families who can trace their lineage to the apostle Thomas in an unbroken line of succession. In fact, there is a church building in India which purports to be the very earliest church building in existence, let alone still intact, one that they claim the Apostle Thomas used before the end of the 1st century. Even if that isn't true, there is good evidence that apostles did indeed go to India. The Christians who live in India today call themselves St. Thomas Christians. That is their heritage. And the historian Eusebius records the journey of a different Christian scholar in the 2nd century who made it to India only to find believers already there, claiming that his disciple, either Bartholomew or Thomas, the linguistics are a little confusing, had been there, and claiming that they had artifacts from the apostle to back it up. And certainly the evidence of Christianity appearing strongly in India within 100 years of the foundation of Christianity certainly speaks to some evangelists making their way there and creating such a strong presence that the faith lasted mostly on its own for over 1,000 years until it reconnected with the West. So how did a disciple of Jesus get all the way to India in the 1st century? Well, the first account we have of Thomas' journey comes in the book of the Acts of Thomas, written originally in Syriac, the language of the Eastern Church. In it, Thomas is a builder who gets recruited by an Indian king named Gonzalez to build him a grand palace. Thomas agrees and goes east, spending a lot of time preaching along the way. And when he finally gets there, Thomas takes the king's money, but seeing so much poverty, he begins to hand it out to the poor instead of building anything. When King Gonzalez finally finds out, he freaks out and tosses Thomas in prison. But that same day, the king's brother, Gad, died, saw a vision of heaven, and communicated that vision back to his brother, telling Gonzalez what a wonderful palace Thomas had been building for the king in heaven. And just like that, the story goes, the king was converted on the spot. Now, this sounds quite fanciful, but Gonzalez and Gad were real people, and they ruled the kingdom in India between the years 19 and 45 CE. On top of this, travel was not as restricted as you might think back then. The Silk Road was open through the Parthian Empire to China, and Roman traders were regularly plying the sea to the western coast of India to trade for spices. There were even some Jewish colonies on the Indian coast, right near where Indian Christianity appears to have started. And while the Acts of Thomas certainly contain some questionable content, the evidence is quite strong overall that Thomas, or missionaries in Thomas's name, made it to the subcontinent and made India one of the very first places in the world to hear about Jesus. And for a man that the West knows just as the doubting disciple, that is pretty impressive. Thanks for watching this look at one of the lesser known disciples. Come back next week when I'll be taking a look at what it really means to be Orthodox. And if you like this video, maybe you'll like some of my others. Here's a playlist to all of the different videos I've done on history in general. And here's if you want to go back and watch this particular series from the beginning. But as always, thank you for watching. Have a great week. See you next Friday.